L. Horn interview, 2:30 p.m., Tuesday, August 1st, 1978.
That's how I first met him, when he was director of the Georgia. He initially went down to Hancock County, essentially, as I recall, more or less as a project of the Human Relations Council to try to see what organizing a basically black county would result in. And I went down in the early days, I guess, starting in probably about 66 or so. When he first went down, I went down a few times helping him out with problems he was having with the local folks down there, the local white power structure, as did several other lawyers. Betty Kerr, I don't know if you remember
I
Betty.
don't remember Betty.
Betty would be a good source, and you definitely should talk with her.
Betty Kerr, is that?
Kehrer.
Mhm.
She
Is she here in Atlanta?
She is. She was in charge of the Georgia Criminal Justice Council, and then she moved over to Georgia Legal Services and was in charge of that. She's the wife of Al Kerr, who's the
I know that name,
Southeast
of
Director of the Civil Rights Section of the AFL-CIO for the Southeast, of course. And Betty's a lawyer, and she's prominent in her own right. She is close to Carter, and she's an astute politician as well as being a very bright lady and a bright lawyer. And she worked with John. I worked with him. We both were supportive. And when we first went to Hancock County, the first time I went down there, it was almost like the Delta area of Mississippi at that time. It was extremely restrictive. The whites maintained their power in the usual coercive ways. And John cured them pretty quickly, though. He organized those folks and got them registered to vote. So, this is your grant?
This was my, that's just the précis of the proposal to the NEH. I was interested in it because I had been, I'm a native of the county. Of course, I've not lived there since the 1930s when I was a high school student. But I've always been interested in the county, and at first I thought, you know, this is totally a reaction of conservative whites against an effort to change things. But later I decided it maybe was a little bit more complicated than that in Hancock County.
Incidentally, I was reading in the paper yesterday Judge Osgood Williams is from Taliaferro County. He represented him in the legislature and then moved here to Atlanta in the early 50s.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
Although Taliaferro is next door, I never knew too many people in Taliaferro. I didn't know much about that county. But if you've studied Hancock County at all, if you know its history, it's a very unusual county, you know, and was considered into the 30s as being a very liberal county on race relations for Deep South rural county. The Huberts, did you ever hear of them?
The Huberts.
The Hubert family. They had a big place out, a big project at Mayfield in the New Deal days back in the 30s, near Mayfield.
No, sure don't.
I've talked to some of the Huberts. One of them's out at Atlanta University, and he was telling me about that being one of the few places in the state where where blacks could buy land at the time his father was interested in buying land. So Hancock County has a very complex and unusual history. It's quite different from the typical Deep South rural county, if you really dig into it. Because I have a lot of information, but what I really don't have is I don't have insights into John McCown, what made him tick, what made him work, which is really what now I'm trying to get at. I'm also trying to get at any lessons that can be learned from the Hancock County experience, because there are many counties not too different from Hancock throughout the Deep South, as you well know.
As I say, I first came in contact with John in the Human Relations Council when I'm from Alabama, and the only integrated organization in the late 40s and early 50s over there was the Human Relations Council. And, so I had belonged to it for a long time, and I joined when I came here in '63. And Liza Pascal was head of the Atlanta Human Relations
She's
Council.
an old friend of mine. I've known her.
And John was not then. I think Francis Pauley may have been the director of the Georgia Council at that time. I'm not sure who it was, I've forgotten. But John shortly became the director and was a director in the mid-'60s. And he went down there and he called on various of those in the activist community to help him out, calling on us, the lawyers, for legal services. And as I say, I went down several times assisting him, and he whipped things though in the shape where he was able to handle it on his own fairly quickly. So from somewhere, I guess I might have gone down there several times and called down there and threatened to go down there. Other times he'd use us as his weapon. The locals did not like having Atlanta lawyers come down there with court reporters and putting them through a lot of stuff they didn't understand because it was over their head. They had a vague notion that what they were doing was probably illegal and they were going to get whipped in court sooner or later. So anytime you show up with an Atlanta lawyer and a court reporter, they generally back down. Mm-hmm. And John used us for that purpose, but by a very short period, in a couple of years, he had gotten a majority of black voters, and the tide had turned. They then treated him more or less as a political power. And I didn't have a lot of contact with John until the newspapers and the Fed started on him,
Mm-hmm.
which was...
Now, what brought that about? Was there some
It's
specific-
not really clear what brought it about. I'm not as sure. You probably would be able to get that better from Marion Fraley. She was John's.
Now, is she still down there? Is she-
She's there, but she comes up here a good bit.
Mhm.
She still has her home down there, and I think she's planning probably to come back up in this area. It's difficult for her to make a living down there.
Mhm.
And Echo, as you know, is totally bankrupt and defunct.
So she
essentially.
doesn't have employment with Echo. There's no Echo.
No, there's no Echo anymore. The last Echo existed off of John's insurance money. When that
Mhm.
ran out, there was no more Echo. It's still, I suppose, in existence in paper, but in practice it's about gone. But many things have been changed, and I think irreversibly changed, and for the better. Black people participate in Hancock County, and despite everything, still basically can control the county and do control the county. The old Echo associates and lieutenants still hold political power in that county as far as running the county government. The dispute that we had when John died, there was, of course, some jockeying for leadership. And my memory for names is really poor, John. You have to excuse me. I can refresh my recollection, and I'm just giving you, an overview at this point. But one of the people who felt like, I guess, he was to be in a leadership position is now the current head of the county commission. He is on the other faction. The other two members are on the McCown side.
So the head of the commission is the anti-McCown group.
He's anti-McCown.
But they're all blacks.
They're all
local
blacks. And he was supported by the white faction. Basically what he did is allied himself, and I suppose he figured with the White Alliance and the black group that was in alliance with the whites, they could control the county, but they were not able to do so. What had happened was the candidate for chairman from the McCown faction is a guy named Johnny Warren, who got indicted and was unable to run. The McCown faction made a tactical mistake, as often happens when you have personalities like that. They tried to stick with Johnny Warren, who's a very popular figure, when they should have qualified someone else to run that spot. They could have won. Johnny had two opponents. One of whom was this black man who's now the chairman. The other was a white man. We had a primary election in which Johnny got just over 50% of the vote, but one box was under challenge because the machine was defective. The voting machine was defective that recorded the votes, and that was enough to potentially throw him below the 50%. The other two candidates, who each received about 25% of the vote, were then declared to be the only eligible candidates, which I thought was bad because you have two minority candidates here.
Mhm.
No one else can qualify, and I urged the McCown faction support the white man on the theory he'd be easier to get rid of, and also he'd be more inclined to make alliances with the McCown faction, but they were not able to prevail. Some of them supported the white man, but the black man won. He now is chairman. We had a series of hearings, some of which Weltner heard. Basically what he was doing was trying to run the county commission as chairman instead of recognizing he only had one vote. We've now pretty much cured him of that notion. But to get an overall perspective, you're going to probably have to go down and talk to all those folks. There is an anti-McCown or an anti-McCown faction
In the black community.
in the black community, of which this person would be the principal representative, probably. I wish I could remember his name. It's George Lott. George Lott. When we had the hearing in front of Weltner, no, it wasn't a hearing in front of Weltner. It was a subsequent hearing that we had in front of Judge Jackson. All the white people in town came down and sat on one side of the courtroom. All the black people came and sat on the other side. And we got George Lott on the stand, and it turned out he had authorized himself without clearing it with the commission to trip to Washington for the inauguration of Carter. Spent a bunch of money for doing that and hadn't gotten any authorization. And, very shaky circumstances. Now I got him on the stand and called him up and all that, and really made him look bad. He was just dipping his hand and tells what he's doing. All the white people got up and left the courtroom. There was nothing but blacks left.
Well, George Jackson is the local judge.
He's
for that
the Superior
circuit.
Court judge for the
that.
Okmulgee Circuit, which includes Milledgeville, Baldwin County, and a couple other counties, but also includes Hancock.
Is he from Milledgeville? I
No,
know he's not
he's
a
from little town to the west of Milledgeville, the name of which escapes me. There's another judge in that circuit,
judge. Sometimes
Joe Duke.
Eaton. Oh,
Joe
yeah.
Duke is out of Milledgeville, and Jackson is out of, I think
Not
that was-
Edenton.
No.
Irwinton, Monticello.
Monticello, I believe, is where he's out of. Yeah, Monticello.
Uh-huh.
None of them are from Hancock. Get back to John. John's a very energetic, driving, commanding type person. John reminds me a good bit of Jose Williams. They have the same temperament, styles, and everything.
That's an
And,
interesting comparison.
I don't really know the details of John's business, despite the fact I've represented him a long time, but my impression of John, as is my impression of Jose, is they're both essentially dedicated to what they're doing, but neither one of them is above reaching his finger in the collection pot and picking out quarters at passes
Mhm.
or something like that, you know.
Mhm.
But then when push comes to shove, they've got their own political interests, which they will maintain. They're not purist, and they're not above little shenanigans.
Mhm.
John, of course, as you know, is accused of waylaying a lot of money. John, more than Jose, probably did.
Well, he had access to
He had
more.
access.
Yeah.
Well, Jose
Yeah.
could have more
Yeah.
if he wanted to do it, but John had access to it and possibly utilized it. But John had no real concept of accounts or limitations. For example, we found there were occasions when he used money that was ostensibly designated as his in his personal accounts to buy equipment, things like that.
Mhm.
He'd contra-wise buy things from one account for something else. He had no
He had no
conception
previous
of-
business experience. He
He
didn't
didn't care.
understand.
He wanted to get something done. He wanted to get a tractor for this operation or something for that.
But
He-
formal bookkeeping was not in his experience anyhow.
He was contemptuous of it,
Uh-huh.
basically.
Uh,
It wasn't within his ability. He just
Mhm.
didn't care. He wanted to get something done. He got it
Mhm.
done. He would dig up the money from private sources, government money, pull it out of his own pocket, wheedle it any way he could. And a lot of the frustration of the government trying to pinpoint John's misfeasances, if any, was that they thought that a lot of this stuff was embezzlement or diversion of funds, when in fact all it was just shifted from one thing to another.
mhm.
John took care of his lieutenants and took care of his people, and I'm sure it diverted money from time to time from the overall process of what he was doing, but he was being very effective, and for that reason I and others continue to support him.
Did he lose some of his liberal friends in Atlanta along the way? Did he do things to
John
alienate-
lost people by the nature of his style. John was very imperious. When he wanted
Mhm.
something done, he insisted that you do it. It was very
Mhm.
difficult to deal with John. I wouldn't say lost. When he left the Georgia Regional Council, there was a big uproar, and there was some contentions that he misappropriated council money in setting up Hancock County things, and in particular for buying up some of the property which there were later transactions on, and one in particular involving Johnny Glustrom, who
Mhm.
was treasurer of the council, created some bad feelings on the part of the council members that Johnny had, and John had profited from money that the council had put up, so to speak, for some of the matters. As you know, the question of whether or not John had a big house or not is no question.
Mhm.
John's version, by the time I got into the matters, I say there was a hiatus from about roughly 69 to about 74 that I had very little contact with John. Once in a while he's in town, he'd come by and see me, or
This was when things were going smooth and
smoothly,
he
didn't really
had
need a
things
lawyer.
going.
Then
as
he came
wanted.
up, when he realized that the feds were going to get on him, and the newspapers were on to him,
Mhm.
then he came and asked our assistance. But when I got into the matter, John was claiming, and continued to claim, that the big house was going to be a conference center.
Mhm.
And that's the only version I ever have. Whether or not he had ever had plans to have it as his personal home or not, I don't know, and have no evidence of that. I only have his statements and the indicia we had that it was to be a conference. I think it's an interesting site. Have you been to see it?
No, I
It's
didn't
got
know
a
that you
big-
could go see it. I thought it was a little isolated and
It's not
closed
that
off.
hard to find, and I'm sure somebody can take you out to it, but it's got a big, magnificent gate leading to it, and nothing on either side, really. And it took care of the gate and the approach first, and you go into the conference center, it's just in state of abandonment now. It really
Well, now,
should be
does
taken
his
over.
family live down there?
They
His
never
wife-
did. No one ever lived in the conference center.
Uh-huh.
It was never totally completed. The building structure was completed, but it never was to the point where it's finalized and finished. And
Well, now,
and
his
furnished.
wife and children, are they in Hancock County now?
His wife lives, and lived all the time that I've known her, since it's built in one of the houses in the housing project.
Oh,
As
the
does
one
al-
at Mayfield.
As does almost everybody down there. All of John's lieutenants got houses in the
Mhm.
housing project, as well as, of course, a lot of rank and file people. But she lived in there. Marion, his girl Friday, I guess you'd say, lived in a house which she has in her own name, not too far from Sparta. She lives outside of the Mayfield area.
Mhm.
John was a very strong and determined person, had a lot of physical courage. As I say, very similar to Jose. I've seen them both just walk right into the teeth of things that I was cringing from. He was a very physically courageous person, very strong-willed, determined to prevail.
Was he an educated man? Had he had formal education?
I don't know the extent of it, but he was a very bright person.
Mhm.
John was able to manipulate grant proposals, and
He could write
the whole
a grant
John-
proposal and...
well, his associates did a lot of the actual finalizing of the material. Mary was particularly good at that, but John was.
Now, she was trained at Cornell, I remember reading somewhere.
She, I think, has got a master's from Cornell. She met John at the University of Georgia. I'm not sure exactly.
I didn't know
how.
he had any connection at the University of
I don't
Georgia.
know,
At a
but
conference they made.
she was at the University of Georgia. I believe her husband was either a graduate student or teaching there, and they got divorced shortly after that, and she started working with John full time. You probably heard the rumors that she and John were sweethearts, and that her children are fathered by John.
Yes, I have heard that.
Don't know whether
See,
or not that's true or not, but there's.
I have very
Well, yeah.
interesting connections, because my connections in Hancock County through old family back there are very conservative. I have the conservative white connections in Hancock County, and I have the since the 30s liberal connections in Atlanta. So I have heard
Marion is a
good
great
bit on
Marion
both
is a,
sides.
Marion is a great gal, though, and totally dedicated to the civil rights movement and working for the people.
Well, do you think that his interest in her was in what she could do for the movement, or was that,
Oh,
or
I'm
do you think
sure.
it was a romantic interest that he had in her?
I don't know that. I never saw him in a romantic
Mhm.
situation. All I know is the stories I heard.
Does she
I
have
know
some-
that his basic reliance on her was as a very valuable assistant, because she did do all of the implementing, and he relied on her very heavily.
Mhm.
He had total confidence in her loyalty and integrity, and I think she's a great person. I have a great deal of respect and admiration for her. John was as most people are like that, a mixed person. He had,
Mhm.
great traits, and he also probably had weaknesses. Marion was more steady and was totally, in my opinion, above reproach as far as her motives went, and her general ability and general level of integrity.
See, I've only heard the other side.
Yeah,
I've not,
well,
and I've not ever met
I've
her.
known-
Do you
I've
think she
known-
would talk to her?
I think she likely would. I'd certainly give her the opportunity.
Mhm.
As I say, I think the world over. I think she's just a very bright, able lady. Obviously, totally committed to.
Is she from this section somewhere? Do you know where she is from originally?
I'm not sure she's got people all around here, so I presume she is from this
Now,
area.
Fraley is a name. Is that the way she pronounces it, Fraley?
Fraley.
That is a name common, well, not
I'm
common,
not sure
but a
whether
Middle
that's her
Georgia
name
name.
or her husband's name. I just don't.
Well, that's a Middle Georgia name. It's a Baldwin County name, I think.
I'm of the impression that she's from this area, but
Mhm.
I don't know her that person that well. I
I
just
d-
had
I
a
don't
lot,
know that either.
had a lot of business contacts with her, particularly over the last several years as this case was developing. She was the reliable one. I did have the same problem with Jose. I call Jose, he won't return the calls, or he won't get material up, and he forgets things. So I always call. He's got an assistant named Terry Randolph. It's the same way. You call
Mhm.
Terry and make sure that it gets done. And,
Yeah.
you did the same with John. You call Marion. She would see that it was implemented. She was very reliable. As I say, I developed a very high opinion of her reliability and her basic commitment and integrity.
And you say she's there, but she's going to be leaving, you think?
I get the impression
Mhm.
she's going to be
She'll be
leaving, but you'd have to ask her. I just really don't know.
I guess to talk to her, you would have to write her at Sparta.
I've got her phone number. We've got her numbers. You can
Okay.
check around here and get her number
Okay.
before you leave. We've got a number down there, and she got a sister up here that we contact her with when she's
Mhm.
up here. And I don't have those numbers before me, but they're around that day. As I say, to get a picture of John in the early days, I think you ought to talk to some of the Georgia Council people. You
Mhm.
should talk probably with Frances Pauley.
Now, I know her.
And
She lives out in Druid Hills.
yeah.
Mhm.
And Frances is a good old lady, and I think she'd give you an honest evaluation,
Mhm.
pluses and minuses of John, because she was devoted to the Georgia Council. There was some feeling that John had had used the council to set himself up with a power base and manipulated the council, and others were equally strong that he was doing a good thing and they were supportive. And I've talked with a number of folks over the years, including the guy that succeeded John as director. I forgot his name. He was on the ACLU board for a while. I can't remember his name now. And he had mixed opinion of John, but basically was favorable.
Mm-hmm.
There's a good film that was done by BBC. Have you seen that film?
No, I had heard about it
We
because
had it.
someone down there told me that it was made several years ago.
Yeah, we had a copy around here, but I think we let go of it. Marion could get you access to that. You definitely should see it because you get a chance to see John in person, hear him talking.
And see, I never saw him.
And
I
also you
talked
get
to
a chance to see some of the local folks. They had some interviews with one local guy there. He said, what do you think they need? He says, well, McCown needs killing.
him. Oh, he just said that right out in
Yeah,
the
they had it
interview
right
with
on-
the TV.
right on the TV.
Well, he needed a PR advisor, didn't he?
No, he's just a countryman.
Yeah, he was just telling
He was
it
telling you
like
what he
saw it.
thought, yeah. And there was no question that hostility was down there.
Yeah.
That's one of
Well,
the
that's
few
understandable.
places where I really felt physical apprehension going
Uh-huh.
down there. Before I would leave, I'd check under the hood of my car.
Oh,
And
really?
Oh, yeah. I didn't just jump in and turn on the switch because I felt that hostility it was just so strong you cut it with a knife.
You know, that's interesting because growing up there as a, well, let's see, I guess I was a child in the early 30s there was, the race relations there were much better than they were most places. And of course, all of the things you associate that were wrong, segregation in the back of the bus and the bad schools, that was all there. But the day-to-day relations between people there were quite good. For instance, they were very opposed. There never was a Ku Klux Klan there, which was unusual in rural Georgia. They didn't want it there. And there never was a lynching in that county. And it was the home of some fairly advanced blacks. You know, even before that, there was a very noted white planter named Dave Dixon. And he did not marry. He had a black mistress. And he left his big estate for the time to her. And I think she was the grandmother of Franklin, who's the advisor to Maynard Jackson.
David Franklin?
Uh-huh. He's descended from this family. Hancock County was sort of like New Orleans in that there was a lot of prominent white blood mixed
In the black
community, and
Yeah.
and some of it carried over into there looking after them. And so it's a strength. It's really a county worth studying. So that hostility was something that came out of the civil rights struggle.
Well,
It was
you know,
not
I was
endemic to
raised in
the-
Alabama about the same time you were raised in Georgia. And part of my raising was in middle Alabama, the rural area, which was not as heavily black. It was,
Mhm.
so I'm not unfamiliar with that background. But after '54, that's the sort of the watershed point in Alabama, and I suppose for the South. There was, talk around, people would quarrel with you. I had adopted liberal views while I was in the Navy when I was a young man, and when I got out of college. I was just starting law school in '54 when the Brown decision came out. Up till that point, I could go to family discussions, maintain my viewpoint. People get a little unhappy with me, but it wasn't anything bad. But after '54,
No.
it just got
Okay.
fierce. I was
Well, that's
banned,
probably what I-
banned from my father's house, and
Is that
oh
right?
yeah, it just got
Now, where did your
really-
father live? What?
Birmingham.
In Birmingham.
It just got really intense, and when people start to make the change, that's when
Right.
when the hate comes out.
Well,
When
I
you're
was-
sitting in the catbird seat, things look pleasant, but
Yeah.
when the cat comes up to get the catbird, why
Yeah, I'm
things
sure it was
change
quite different.
around, and they had such things there. They had they were basically putting people in jail for debt, for owing
Mhm.
money to black
Mhm.
people owing to white people.
Yeah.
In the
Well,
mid-'60s. I mean,
Yeah.
it was still a semi-feudal system, and while I'm sure the harshness of the real ugly hating parts of the South weren't there was still that underlying basis that if a black person stepped out of line,
Oh,
there's no
sure,
question
well,
what
that
gonna
was
happen to
always
them.
the case, that was always the case. No, I didn't mean to imply, it wasn't
Yeah.
typically Southern, but it had this little
Yeah.
difference about
Well,
it.
by the
that
time
was
I
good.
got there, John was already down there, and it stirred things up, and it
Yeah.
was a hornet's nest.
Yeah, I'm sure.
First time I went down there was on a case, and I walked into that room with a court reporter, and, oh, they were spitting fire at me.
Well, I could understand that, yeah.
And they checked on me real quickly and decided I was a real troublemaker. And so we went round and round, and they finally put the thing off, and ultimately just quietly and sub silentio backed off of what they were doing. I don't even remember what it was.
Well,
But
you
I
know,
went down there so many different things and so many different times, and in other areas of the South too. I wasn't just working on Hancock County. It's hard to remember the exact precise details. It's been, I guess it's been 12 years ago. I guess 66 or 67 was the first time I went down there.
see, I haven't lived down there in so many years, and what really got my attention, I had thought all of this was the usual Southern reaction, you know, to change. What got my attention was when several buildings were burned. The big old house was burned
Well,
when he was in jail, and I wondered.
There's
what-
more than a passing belief that that was burned by the white faction. The person who had owned that house had allied himself with John in some way. I think he'd sold him some property, had done something that pissed off the locals.
Mhm.
And John had no reason to burn it, and they did. And John swears that it was that faction, and they tried to imply that it was his folks that did it in retaliation
Well,
for him
let's
being
see,
in
now,
jail.
Mr. Burgamy, for years, when I knew the place, Mr. Burgamy owned the place, and then the Georgia Power Company owned it, and then it was given to the Historical Society, which had just
There
spent a
was
good
one,
sum of
I
money.
don't remember whose it was, who got burned out, and it was
Oh, now, there were a couple of
insinuate-
homes.
It was some beautiful old home. It was
Right.
an insinuation that John's folks had done it, and John said it was the other faction that did it.
Well, I think
Well,
this is.
you know, in a situation like that, you never know who's doing what.
It was after that anyhow, when the newspaper accounts started, the Macon papers and then the Atlanta papers, it was
I'm
after
sure it
that.
all started up basically, probably from that earlier spat when was it that the city ordered the guns and the county
Oh,
ordered
well,
twice as many?
that was even, I've got it in this brief thing here somewhere.
My recollection is that
Let's see,
things began to boil about that time.
let's see. In 1971, the Sparta police force in a town of
Yeah.
less than 2,000 ordered 10 machine
And
guns.
then the county ordered 20.
McCown responded by ordering 30.
30?
Jimmy Carter, then governor, intervened to stop the arms race. Carter intervened again in 1974, and that was when they had the fires. And all that.
That's when the investigation started in 74.
That was after the fires, when the houses burned and there was a lot of
Yeah.
turmoil.
Well, you have, in my opinion, the Atlanta newspapers are a reactionary crowd, and I don't know what the circumstances were, but they were not sent down to do an impartial investigative job. In my opinion, they sent down to prove a point, which was that the blacks were incompetent, were stealing, and that McCown was crook. The blacks were having a hard time, as you know. They had a problem, of course, the general problem of acquiring managerial talents and just running the government in a business is difficult, and if you've got no training, it's even more so. And then you heap it up on the fact that you get your catfish farm poisoned 2 or 3 times.
Oh, was the catfish farm
Oh, yeah,
poisoned?
it was poisoned a couple times. The end result is you say black folks don't know how to run a business. They waste $2 million, but nobody can function under
Now, I never
those-
had heard
those
that about
conditions.
the
Oh, yeah.
catfish farm. I didn't
catfish
know
farm was poisoned at least twice.
that. Well,
John also had a problem, which is common with people like him. Jose had the same problem, delegating authority. You give somebody a job to do it, and you end up messing around doing it himself without the considered effort that you need to do to carry out a project. wasn't totally that way, but to a great extent he did that, in part because some of the people around him were various levels of competence and
Mm-hmm.
training and understanding. You just had basically a backward county with people that had no training. You expect to have problems
Right.
managing an enterprise with people like that. It's going to be waste committed and things lost and tore up that shouldn't be. Then it was, I got the impression from my view of those white folks down there, and also from my general knowledge of white folks in the South, that, and from talking to some of them, that they would rather remain in poverty than have the county improve at the expense of a serious change in their social structure. I don't think there's any question in the world that was true. I talked with enough of them, saw enough of them, that I'm confident that that's true.
You mean by serious change that to live in the county when the blacks were
Where blacks would have
were running.
their proper representation based on their proportion. There's just no question in my mind that that was the general prevalent attitude. And the unfortunate thing is the whites who have a contrary attitude tend to leave,
Mm-hmm.
and the ones that remain are by and large the ones that are more intransigent. And also probably the blacks that leave are the ones who could level things off to some extent. It's a vicious cycle.
Well, I guess what really happens is what happens in any rural area. The brighter ones of both races tend to leave.
It makes it more difficult
What happens?
to prevail, but God, they were hostile, as I say, still are. They're not as vicious now in their attitude because it's now become firmly established that they don't have the physical power
Mm-hmm.
to do things. A lot of that was just the old loss of that power, that absolute power of the black man.
Well, it wouldn't be
that
easy
happened.
in any community for this to happen.
That never, never. You remember the people that said never, never, and then of
Yeah.
course when it began to occur, they fought it. Now they pretty much know that it's inevitable that black people are going to have acquired political power.
Do you think that McCown's personality was affected by the way he was received there? Do you think if the whites had received him differently, he would have been a different sort of person? Now, I remember.
I think it's inevitable that you had that reaction. I mean, people don't give. I've never known any. Have you ever heard of any group give up power willingly?
No.
White, black, pink, or purple?
No, I really haven't.
It's not in the. It's
not
not
part
the
of human
nature
nature.
of human nature to do it. John wasn't that intransigent, actually. John had a rhetoric about him, but John did get along with some of the whites. He had a loose alliance with those that he could deal with. He tried to beat the sheriff, Slim. I forgot Slim's last name. The present sheriff.
I don't know him.
The sheriff was able to. Sheriff was smart. He went to the black community, and I think he hired him a deputy or two, and made his own overtures. He survived the election, and McCown recognized that the sheriff was probably going to be able to weather it, so he made a political alliance with
But
the
now
sheriff.
the sheriff
which
is still in, isn't he?
still in. And that sheriff was absolutely neutral between the factions. He didn't side with the whites, and he didn't side with the blacks.
Mhm.
When they had that rumpus in town, when they arrested some of the Echo workers for just nit shit stuff, I tried those cases, and believe me, they were absolute nit shit.
Mhm.
And they arrested John. John was over in Mayfield when the thing broke out, and a genuine downtown little mini riot started. The blacks collected in the streets and raised hell.
I
And
think
John
I remember.
came there. Well, they arrested John. They charged him with several things. The center charge being that he refused to break up the blacks. And of course, he hadn't created the situation. He was under no legal duty to break it up. And he suggested that to break up real quickly if they released the woman from jail, the one that they'd arrested. And they ended up arresting John, and he refused to make bond. That's when
Now that was the
trouble
same
broke
time
out.
they had the fire. And I remember there was something in a Baptist paper about marching to the Baptist church on Sunday night. Do you remember anything about that?
No, I was in and out of it. There was so many things going on. I was involved in so many things over the last 10 years. It's just hard to remember which were which, and I can't keep count of anything except the broad things. But I've still got the papers and there, and as I say, I tried the case, and they had no business arresting the woman. It was a total harassment arrest,
Mm-hmm.
and the arrest of John was even worse because he hadn't done anything. He wasn't even there when it started, and didn't do
Mhm.
anything when he got back downtown.
On
except
what
refuse
grounds
to break-
did they arrest him? Do you remember?
Basically for refusing to break up
Mm-hmm.
the group that he hadn't formed. He had no
Mhm.
legal duty to break up something he didn't cause.
Mm-hmm.
And we won the cases. We got acquittals on both charges that they ultimately tried John with.
Were these again? Were they tried locally? Were
Tried,
these?
yeah.
And these
Always
would have been
tried.
the local circuit court.
Yeah, it was tried in
Judge-
Superior Court.
Yeah, the same judges from.
Judge Jackson, I believe,
Uh-huh.
presided over that trial, and Joe Riley, the DA, prosecuted. But you couldn't have won. They couldn't have won that case anyway. I had an all-black jury. By the time we finished picking the jury, well, it was a foregone conclusion that the most they could have done was hung the jury.
Well, now
But
could
we
they?
won it on merits as well as with the jury. They had no case. I mean, the guts of their case was just erroneous. They should have dismissed it on motion to dismiss, in my opinion.
But in the legal system, even if you, as you say, their case was weak, could they have taken it up to a higher court?
No,
there wasn't any way
you
to
have
move
a right, constitutional right to be tried in the county where the offense occurs. You, the defendant, can move for a change of venue if you can't get a fair trial, but there are no provisions for the state
I see.
to have a change of venue. It was part of that old hostility which you can feel and hear and see if you go down and talk to those folks.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of just lack of communication between people. As I say, I talk with both of them because being a white Southerner at that time when I first went down there, I didn't have the beard and the long hair. I could still go down and talk
You could
like
work
an
it out.
Alabama country boy,
Yeah.
and I could talk with them. When I first went down there, I drifted into the local, stopped to get me gas and buy me a cold drink and talk and chat and feel it out. And there's just no question that there was that typical Citizens Council hate there. I mean,
Mhm.
I tried a couple places and you could just sense it. John was a lot more able to understand the white person's problems and dilemma than they were able to understand what he was trying to do.
Mhm.
There was a lot more understanding on the Echo faction, but they had little patience, of course, with the notion of the white folks trying to maintain the old status quo, but they did understand it. John did deal with a number of whites. As I say, he ultimately made an alliance with the sheriff. He had good relations with the old white lady that he bought a lot of that Echo property from. He got along
Mhm.
very well with her.
The Reynolds family.
I
out of
believe it was
Mayfield.
Reynolds, yeah,
Mhm.
Reynolds was the
Yeah,
lady's
that's a
name.
prominent
Mhm.
family out there at Mayfield.
But I think if you talk with her, she'd say she rather liked John. I don't
Mhm.
know. I may be presuming I
She-
didn't know her that well, but she
Well,
seemed
I
to get
know
along
her
with
well. She's a friend. Our families have
She
been
was very,
friends.
you know, she wasn't bound down with all that old South
Mm-hmm.
notion of blacks being in their place. It was
Yeah.
a business transaction, and John was able enough to handle what he was saying he'd do, and she seemed to get along with him very well.
Francis Reynolds.
Francis Reynolds, that's who it was. And others of the white community. There were several of those folks. In fact, one of the people that got tried was a white man that sided with John, and there's no doubt in my mind that he had a black girlfriend allegedly, and they were after him. That's
Now, I
why
didn't know
said-
him, but wasn't it a name Jackson? Seems like I remember a name. Was it a Jackson? Was that the name?
I believe it was Jackson. I can't remember.
I just remember that from the newspaper clippings, but I didn't know him.
The best person to talk to get a view of the legal thing is Roosevelt Warren, who's a very bright, able lawyer. His family's from down there, from the Warren family. He'd gone up to
Now this is the black family, the Warren.
the Warrens. Yeah, I think. Well, I'm sure they came from the white family
Yeah.
originally, but Roosevelt's people were from there. He had gone north to Indiana, but came back more or less to work in the area of his people.
Well, where is Roosevelt Warren now?
He's down there. He lives in one of those houses in the
Oh,
house.
so he lives at Mayfield.
He was the general counsel for Echo and still represents a lot of those people.
Do you think they would be open to
I would
talk
think
to?
so. I would think so. If they don't, then they're going to
Yeah,
not
well, I'm
gonna get
trying to
their
get
version in,
right,
and,
right. Because I can see, because having grown up there, I know all the old timers and I'm connected with the old white families. I can get their side very easily. The other side would
well,
be
I'm confident Roosevelt would talk to you. I would certainly call him
okay.
and see. He's very bright. He's just an absolutely dedicated, decent person.
Now he's practicing law there.
Practicing
How
law.
could he survive practicing law there?
Well, there's enough cases down there to keep him going. He has modest
His living standard.
standard of living. That's one of the things I like about him. Most lawyers, and includes most black lawyers, are interested only in making money. Everybody's upwardly mobile, but he's not. He's interested in what he's doing.
Here, I see you tuning into it.
We're really into it. Am I ruining your afternoon if you got to
No,
go on to something
no.
else?
I just need you really for 5 minutes. If Doris is here, I think Dr. Cummings
I'll go and see her, but there's.
is. Well, I know
What
it's
can I
even,
say?
it's even worse, but I
What?
want at least you to meet her before.
Don't remember a reporter from New Orleans. I've got mainly the things that appeared in Georgia newspapers and a couple of things from the.
He's
My
appeared in the
paper.
Washington Star.
Now I think I have that. Someone in Washington from Hancock County sent me the Washington Star.
We've got reprints. You probably should look at our
Now, I have
clippings
all
too.
these.
We've got a bunch of clippings that, which will duplicate a lot of yours, but may
He
include.
gave me these to
What's
look
the
at.
guy's name? See what he's got.
Pardon?
You got that article? You give me his name off.
Yeah. I haven't gotten. I don't see it yet. Jason Berry, special
That's
for
it.
the Washington Star. Hancock County, Georgia, a political tragedy by Jason Berry, special to the Washington Star. Now I do have that.
That's it. That's basically a favorable article to the McCown side.
This is from the Washington Star, Sunday, May 8th, 1977.
Somewhere between Jason Berry and Jeff Neesmith, truth lurks.
Uh-huh. You think they represent opposing poles?
Pretty
or
much
different-
I would say Jeff Neesmith accepted uncritically the white version in the same sense that Jason Berry probably accepted more or less uncritically the black version, although Jason did attempt to interview a lot of the folks who apparently did not want to talk with him, anticipating that he was going to come out with a favorable story on our behalf.
That's always an interesting problem for somebody.
I hate to see things degenerate with that, but and basically, I think what John was doing was good. He was changing the power relationship down there, which was long past it changing. In the process, as I say, he may have lifted a couple of quarters out of the collection plate, but he was still down there working and fighting, and that was his basic purpose. And necessary, it was overdue.
Do you
And
know
the whole problem with what the federal government and what the newspapers done is they have stopped that movement essentially in its tracks. And I think in great part that's what it was designed for. That's my own opinion, and I believe it strongly.
you stopped it not with reference to Hancock County, but spreading to other areas that
That's exactly what it was for, and I think that's what it did. I think it was yourself, it's difficult to pin down how things happen. It could be just as simple as some of your people from Hancock County having friendships with people in the newspaper, writing it up, the newspaper started, the feds come behind it, the next administration is not going to be unfavorable to doing something like that. At that period, the Nixon administration was in the process of dismantling the whole poverty program. Remember, what was the name of that guy that was such a reactionary nut that was the young fellow that was in charge of the Nixon
don't
program,
know.
was phasing out legal services altogether.
now that aspect of it I don't know.
But
But now I thought McCown and Hancock County went for Nixon one time.
No, there was at one time as a ploy, John claimed to be a Republican and formed the Republican Party, but John was not a Republican at
But
all.
didn't the county go, actually, wasn't it the only black community in the country that voted for Richard Nixon?
Not to my knowledge.
Now, that's an interesting point.
Don't believe that's true. John
I
formed the
wanna-
Republican Party as a ploy at one time to claim he was a Republican, but in
Mhm.
practice, he was a Democrat, still was.
I want to check into that. I don't know where I got that. Somewhere in the clip file that I've got, it was either intimated or said. I've got this great pile of newspaper clippings, and I just remember some.
Well, he formed the Republican Party down there for a while, and flirted with the state and national organization, but they quickly saw through it, and they never gave him real credence as a Republican. And in truth and fact, of course, he wasn't.
Mm-hmm. Well, it wouldn't be likely. It doesn't fit his.
But as I say, to me, the tragedy of McCown, whether McCown did it or whether McCown brought it on, you might say, or whether the forces did it to get the movement directly, or whether or not they were going after McCown, and as an incident they got the movement, but they killed that movement pretty much. And that movement needs to spread down in that area.
Well, now, McCown, I remember reading Peter Range, who was writing for Esquire. There was a piece, you probably saw it at the time, in Esquire magazine some years ago, where he didn't really have a point of view in this piece, but he interviewed McCown, and McCown said he had picked Hancock County because it had the highest percentage of blacks in any county state, and that he'd gone down there because of that. And among the things he said, I remember there were some rather dramatic quotes in there. He said, at this time I hated white people. He said I had two, did he say 45? Anyhow, he said I had 2 guns, and I hated white people, and I picked this town.
John was working white people up here in the council, and his principal allies were whites. That's some of John's rhetoric that he'd have said facetiously and was picked up as truth. But from the time I knew John, from the mid-60s on, he was quite adept at having white people work with him, and I never detected the slightest bit of serious and across-the-board anti-white attitude. Now, he'd use rhetoric as all black people in that position do about whites, but
Well, do you know anything about the history of why? Do you think that was an accurate statement that he looked at the census and he picked Hancock County out because, and so he just?
I would say that's very
So,
likely.
it
He
wouldn't-
obviously was seeking for whatever reasons to get a county that had a large black population to organize it. The main question that's open, and I don't know the answer to it, and there probably is no answer, is whether or not he was doing it strictly for civil rights, Human Relations Council reasons, or whether he had his own personal empire interest in it, and probably a combination.
Right. Well, it's hard to analyze our own motives.
I doubt that he even articulated a reason that much. You fool yourself on things like that.
Do you know whether there are people who would have known him as a very young person, say in elementary or high school? Was
He's from South Carolina.
Do you have any?
Now, Marion would know more about his background than anybody.
And
She's
she-
closer to him than she'll know where his family is. His mother's moved to New York now. She's living in New York City. But I'm sure he's still got people over South Carolina. He was raised, it seems to me, in the Orangeburg area.
Mm-hmm.
But Marion could give you his historical background.
What I really would like to do would be to find people who knew him at all stages, and really sort of see when he developed this, see this development of his interests and of his personality. Now that may be an impossible task, but I would like to try to do it.
Yeah, well, John had an anti-authoritarian drive to him, which is one of the things that attracted me to him. I had the same attraction to Jose. It's more than just racial; it's a class thing almost. They're opposed to people that have power and manipulate it, and then when they get power, they tend to be despotic too.
This is not unusual.
It's
is
not
it?
at all
No.
unusual, and I would probably have problems living in a county that's run by John McCown or Jose if it's totally controlled by him in the sense of political control that you know in certain counties. Many of those counties, white or black, I'd clash with.
I find that I tend to sympathize with a group, and then when they get in power, I tend to be very critical of them.
Well, the black people, just like anybody else, they can be just as abusive as white people. There's no essential difference. The only difference, of course, is that we've got a historical tradition of self-government and running things, and we've mellowed. But black people today, the black middle class is about where the white middle class was in the late 40s and early 50s. They're into building their little basements, the materialistic pursuits. Very similar. They're about one generation behind us. They haven't developed a large class with people that are motivated by non-economic factors, so to speak. They have a small class of those people, but nothing the size of the white groups. You know, when we're in movement politics, it ends up with a white law firm representing a black movement. Again and again we have that come out. You say, where are the black lawyers? They're making money where most of the white lawyers are too, of course.
Of course. So it goes.
And in fact, in this particular trial here, we had a big clash with one of the black lawyers in this case. He was totally uncommitted to the notion that we should have a collective defense and maintain solidarity. And he did a couple of really bad things, in my opinion, that broke solidarity and almost ruined our defense of the case. He ended up pleading out his client ahead of ours and doing a lot of dumb things. And got really impatient with us when we were critical of him for not consulting and working with us. He's imbued with, and he hurled back at us all these bar association ethical notions about your duty to your client being paramount and so forth. But we had an overall political thing without being disloyal to his client he could have maintained.
Well, who was, now he was the lawyer who was for Miss Ingram.
Yeah.
Miss Ingram.
Yeah.
But no, he's not Roosevelt Warren. This was another lawyer. It's a lawyer here in town.
Marvin Arrington.
Oh, now I know Marvin Arrington because he used to work at Emory. He went to law
He
school
went to
out
law
there.
school there. Marvin's an old friend of mine. I got him into the case, but in retrospect, it was probably a mistake because Marvin's values were the values of a typical white law firms here. Get my client out and to hell with everybody else. And the whole purpose of what we were doing, you know, it was essentially a no-fee case to us. We got some money out of it, but nothing compared with the gigantic amount of work we were doing. It was basically a cause case. That's why we were in it, to maintain a political point of view and protect those people down there. When we got separate lawyers so that if push came to shove, you'd have a lawyer to protect his client. But to the extent you can, you maintain solidarity and keep the whole group together and try to protect the whole group. And this was one that ultimately we prevailed on it, but we had a couple of battles there. And the interesting thing was that the one outside black lawyer we had in it didn't maintain solidarity at all.
But in the legal profession, can a judge, after a case is decided, comment on it? Say, I couldn't go to
Talking
the
about
judge.
Moy?
Yes, I couldn't go to Charlie Moy.
Judge Moore wouldn't know shit about this case.
I see. Well, he really just was
He
there for
handled
the
it.
jury.
I'll tell you who would comment if he could, who would know more than anybody, is Joel Feldman, who handled all the motions and all the interminable proceedings prior to that. Moy got it at the plea level.
And
And
he was
I-
very briefly involved in it, really.
He would know what he read in the reports.
Uh-huh.
He would know infinitely less than you do about the case right now.
Well, now, the prosecuting, I guess the DA, the McKnight,
McKnight was the one at the end. There were
Mm.
one or two before that. Now, Owen Forrester, who's now magistrate, is the assistant U.S. attorney who cranked it off. And I'd love to know what went on because we suspect that Forrester and Jeff Neesmith were in cahoots because Neesmith would show up in Forrester's office and they'd file something and then use that as a basis for a newspaper story to print things they couldn't print otherwise. They did that on a couple of occasions.
well, now, where is Forrester now, do you know?
Forrester's a magistrate. and doing an excellent job as a magistrate.
Is he here?
Yeah, he's across the street. Joel Feldman handled all the motions, and Joel would know a lot about the case. Whether or not he'd come in, I don't know. You can ask him.
Is it proper, is it ethical for someone who has been in that position to talk about it? Or,
I couldn't answer that. I wouldn't consider it particularly unethical if the case is closed.
No,
to comment
it's all
on it.
finished, so it really doesn't affect.
But knowing
me.
Joel, he probably won't want to comment much,
No.
but it won't hurt to ask him.
Yeah.
It's not.
Well,
It's certainly not unethical to ask him.
No, ignorance could authorize me to ask him because I don't know.
It's just McKnight probably. I don't know whether McKnight will want to comment much or not. The guy that we centered on was a fellow named Leach, whose family's from down there. His father, or I believe it's his father, still writes a column for the Sparta Ismailite, although I think he's living down in Florida now.
Oh.
But for a period there, the family was down there, and Leach was the Internal Revenue Service agent who was assigned the investigation. And we had more than a passing suspicion that there was a little incestuous relationship.
Well, now that name, from my childhood there, I don't remember the family name.
Well, Leach
Yeah.
claimed that he was only there briefly, that his family, that he lived there very briefly for a short period after the war, and that he had no real contacts with the community. As I say, though,
I don't remember that name.
The attitude, you're aware of the old Southern attitude.
Oh, of course,
and
I've got
you
some
raised
of it.
it.
I
Yeah,
do.
and that's a part of it. It's the willingness to believe that black people are always crooked and whatever they're doing is wrong, and therefore what you're doing is just to wipe them out. The real reason you want to wipe them out is they're up at the end and trying to achieve power. But you sugarcoat it with the stuff that McCown's a crook, and you need to wipe McCown out. But as I say, in my very strong opinion, the predominant sentiment down, the overwhelming predominant sentiment, was they were going to wipe out that movement, even though had it succeeded, it would have improved the economic level of the whole county. There's no question John McCown's a master at getting grants. He would have brought all kind of enterprises into Hancock County if they cooperated with it. And but he would have changed, and he did. He'd already done it.
Do you
Changed the
think-
power structure.
Now the county is, it's operated. The difference is that now blacks have the positions whites have. Whites are pretty much totally out of control of affairs, except through the economy. But do you think it would have been different had the whites had a different attitude towards McCown and his group? Do you think the new group
But I
would
think it's almost impossible to conceive that they would have a different
Yeah, I
attitude
think
than
it
what
is
they did.
too.
It's just,
I think it
it's
is
just
too.
one of those historical things that have to occur, and the next generation will patch it up. Now, the new generation will be used to the fact that black people are able to vote and able to hold office, and they're already making peace.
Yeah.
They'll go along. Things will move on. The sheriff is a typical example. He weathered the McCown onslaught and made peace with him.
Well, I suspect that some time will take care of some of the most intransigent types on both sides.
Takes care of.
But what I see happening so often is that you change one situation for another that's just like it was, only the colors are different.
That's right, but you can't have 80% of the population totally run by 20%. That's
No.
just not any way that we can adjust to that in the modern world. In the old days, you could, but if you've got an egalitarian society or a society that even pretends to be, that has to go, and people should have recognized. That's what Weltner's report basically told them. It told them, it says you're going to have serious problems if you don't do something to redress this problem. And
But, he
lo
really-
and behold, within a year and a half or two, wow, they had it. He
Yeah.
came right on the heels of it.
But he really couldn't have told them, they had a choice of, I really don't know whether they could have acted any differently. Do you, human
People
nature
don't
being?
act until they're pressed to act.
I don't know whether they could have acted.
If
any
you'd have
differently.
had one or two powerful white men down there who recognized the inevitable, maybe raised a little rhetoric, but basically tried to work and make compromises.
Mm.
If you're lucky enough to have that situation, you probably would have had a more peaceful
But
change and transition. I don't know.
even so, nobody died, did they, in this? Were there any
There were
killings
no
in this?
killings, as far as I know,
Uh,
except for the poor catfish.
Yeah, the poor catfish. That was well.
No human killings to my
Now,
knowledge.
this gets back to my concept of the tradition of the community as being more civilized than some similar communities.
Well, too, you got to recognize that the blacks acquired power relatively swiftly. Within the
Mhm.
space of a year or two, they had a majority.
Yeah.
I mean, wham!
Yeah.
And I'm not positive, but it seems to me in the election of '68, they showed their muscle and got a couple of county commissioners. I think John was elected in '68. He was a commissioner then.
Pretty early.
I'm pretty
but
sure
I've-
'68.
I didn't keep up with it, so I don't really
Oh.
remember.
So at that point, you had the fact that your violence would have been minority violence directed toward a large majority. And I think a lot of those white folks genuinely feared black violence.
Mhm.
Maybe it was totally unjustifiable, but if it's a fear, it's there, whether it's justified or not. And most of black people are country blacks, and they're just confused and scared and everything. But the whites likewise were confused and scared.
And there wasn't really much strong white leadership.
That's the principal problem. If you had strong white leadership, I think you would have had a more peaceful transition, although you would still have serious problems.
Anyway, you did it. But
There's-
see, there was no newspaper there, really. The newspaper was totally worthless as a means of communication on anything controversial. And really no white, your really bright, aggressive whites, that community was dedicated to educating their children. They were all sent off to college, like me. for
And
instance.
most of them didn't come
Hundreds
back.
of them never came back.
That's the problem.
The leadership was all shipped off. And so there wasn't any. Well,
That's what I feel that that would have helped a great deal. I believe that John could have dealt with white people who were willing to deal with him, but I don't believe any of those whites down there were able, either
Could have.
politically or intellectually, were
Mhm.
able to deal with John.
Mhm.
I don't know that they're. It takes a pretty strong person to buck the overwhelming sentiment that existed in the white
Oh.
community and deal with a guy like McCown.
Well, see, I can look more objectively at it from afar than I could have if I'd been living there.
Oh yeah, I'm sure
See.
you get caught up in.
And at the time the Historical Society home was burned and these properties were burned, then I began to have sympathy for my relatives' viewpoint. You know, I thought, well, now these
Well,
there's
just
something going
just
on.
remember who burned the rock.